Welcome to the latest episode of Harmonious World, and this time I'm joined by Outside in Music founder and CEO Nick Finzer, who I spoke to almost exactly a year ago. But this time, instead of talking about an album, I'm talking about his first music business book, which is called Create, Connect, Repeat, Building an Artistic Business in the 21st Century. Nick's book is all built around a delightfully simple strategy: create, connect, repeat. Stick with it and allow the process to take its course. His intention is to help artists build an audience that works for the individual artist, finding sustainable practices for sharing your music. I hope you enjoy listening to my conversation with Nick. Welcome to this episode of Harmonious World. Thanks for joining me, Nick. And let's talk about your book. It sounds very interesting.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for wanting to chat about it. The book is called Create, Connect, Repeat, and it's an approach to building a system kind of for a creative life. I, for the last 7 years or so, have been pretty heavily involved in running a record label and helping a lot of young musicians release their music, and not just young musicians, but early career musicians of all ages. And one of the biggest hurdles that I see is that they kind of put a lot of energy and effort into kind of a single focus for, a period of time. That's going to be their debut release or their debut album or their first project. And then they put it out there, and then some stuff happens, but maybe not as much as they hoped would happen. And they don't always realize that it's kind of building a system so you can keep on doing these things is more important, and building on the success of each one is more important than the success of any one project, or like blowing up, or like, becoming an overnight success, or any sort of idea like that. So the book is, one approach, my approach to organizing, a system for, being creative, like being consistent with a podcast and releasing episodes, all the time, rather than like do 5 at once and then be silent for a year and then come back with 10 more, so this as well as anyone else, that consistency over time. So that's kind of the 10,000 foot view of what the book's about.
Brilliant. What made you want to write it? Tell me about Outside in Music.
So it's essentially it's a record label, but it's expanded to include a lot of different things that we do. It's kind of an artist service company as well as a record label, and so we do around 30 releases a year, and we also do PR for some releases. We do a lot though on the marketing side for musicians. We do a lot of social media marketing, a lot of advising, consulting, making marketing plans, talking with Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, organizing premieres, video features, and all these kind of things. So it's somewhat PR, somewhat marketing, somewhat record label, and somewhat catch-all.
Yeah. Providing the services that artists need.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's where this book came from, I guess, that you realized that there was a need to put everything into one place.
Yeah, basically, it came about, there's been random periods in my life since around 2015 where I've said like, oh, I'm going to try to, turn this into a series of blog posts, or I'm going to turn these ideas into videos. And so there's kind of a smattering of things around the internet, some videos I made, and then there's some articles I wrote, and then there's some talks that I've given at different conferences over the last, 4 or 5 years about related topics or parts of this book. And so it was an idea of, like you just said, kind of collecting them all together and having everything in one place. Because, you don't like repeating yourself all the time, so it's nice to have it all in one place so you can send people to something as a resource. Or for me as an educator, it's nice to be able to give a student a copy of the book and say, here, you're asking me all these questions about marketing, blah, blah, blah. Like, just read this. This will be faster. And then we can talk after.
Right. Do you feel like it's the sort of book that will need to be updated in 3 years or something, because everything will have changed?
Yeah, probably in 6 months or a year.
Right.
I hesitated to put too many things in that were specific, like super tactical, like social media tactics for today, because even now, like the book was finished last summer, July of last summer. So it's already almost been a year. So if I had put really specific things, they would have been wrong probably already, or not optimal, however you want to think about it. So I tried to avoid it, but I'm 100% sure that there will be things that do not age well and that I'll have
Right.
to update, change, delete, or some kind of second edition, something like that.
Yeah, right. So obviously you're on the music business side. How do you feel the music business is coming out of lockdown, the pandemic, etc.?
It's really hard. It's really hard still. I think there was a lot of optimism that we were coming out of it all, but there was such a backlog of bookings that needed to be rebooked, of people that saved albums that maybe didn't release them during the pandemic because they wanted to tour and knew that they couldn't. That there's been different points where there's been a huge oversaturation of stuff coming out, albums, books, et cetera, just pent up, and the demand, I think, still from festivals and audiences, like there's an idea that it's there and people think maybe that it's there, but I feel like people are a little more hesitant still. And we're not quite back as fast as people want it to be, from the artist side, and I think it's coming back, and I think artists have to just be patient and know that they have to get through all of the kind of bookings that were rebooked and new projects. And so it's very competitive. It's always been competitive, but at this particular moment, there's less opportunities and way more stuff because people had, time to put things together, and they had time, and now they're trying to do new projects and old projects. And I'm still now like getting emails from people that canceled gigs that are like, oh, it's finally getting rebooked now, and so it's 2 years later. And so on that side of things, you just have to be patient and know that you just have to wait your turn in a certain way, as the newer artist,
Right. And I think that's what you were saying about this whole thing about create, connect, repeat, is that you can't just put your album out there and go, there you are, world, listen to it, because that's not the way anything happens.
Exactly. Yep. Again and again.
Yeah. I noticed that Gregory Porter is going back to some of his old stuff to re-release it, because there's a lot of people who've discovered him quite recently, and then they've gone, oh, hang on a minute, there's more stuff. And actually to re-release it, you can remaster or whatever, and, get a whole new audience.
That's exactly right. You can re-release it. There's a lot of little tricks you can do. Some people are doing, like, they'll make, I don't know exactly what you want to call it, but it's kind of like a commentary version of the album where, like, there'll be a track and then a track of the artist talking about their inspiration, and then the next track, or maybe there's a bonus track or an alternate take. Those are popular things to do as well.
Yeah, it's perspective, isn't it, on older things, sometimes older music. Fantastic. So what does the future hold? What do you think is for you, for Outside In, for the music business as a whole? Where are we going, do you think?
That's a good question. Overall, where are we going? I don't know, but I think that there's never been a better opportunity for artists to build an audience, and we sometimes forget that, and we want a certain vision of how things used to be. And it's hard for me too to accept that things are different, and that I cannot recreate the life of my heroes. There's a part in the book that the chapter is just called Art Blakey is Dead, and that was kind of a realization talking to musicians that played with him, that like, oh, even though I have this like mythical idea of what it means to come up as a young jazz musician, like those things just don't exist. You can't change reality. So instead of trying to live out this fantasy world, it's kind of being a little more realistic and taking things into your own hands and saying, I can build an audience that can sustain my musical career. I don't need 100,000 people to, be adoring fans of me. I just need 1,000 people that are willing to spend $100 on me every year, and I have a viable artistic business that people will buy tickets to shows or CDs or books or educational materials, whatever those things might be, you can start to really build a business model, build an idea of how you can actually make a life in music rather than just kind of throwing things at the wall. I see artists that do that all the time, just kind of, let's try this, and there's no consistency, there's no plan, and there's no like even 18-month or 2-year plan of like how we're going to create an audience to actually like your stuff. And so I think that's kind of where we're headed. I think still is kind of this splintering of artists and building up their own audiences. I think the big major labels are still going to be, curating some of those artists into their image, but I can't think of that many artists that I know in the jazz world, at least, that are super happy that get those opportunities. They're not super excited with the control that they lose, that by going with somebody that's going to give them $20,000 or $30,000 to make a project. So I think the rise and continuation of the independent artist is here to stay, and I think that embracing that rather than fighting it is very advantageous for the younger generation to know, and just to go and do it, and just to put music out and start now rather than waiting. I find a lot of people build up that quote unquote that first release or that debut in their mind, whatever that first thing, whether it's an album or another type of project. It's like they build it up and it becomes this huge mountain to overcome, when it's really more important to do the first thing so you can get it out of the way, because the first song you make is probably not the best song, right? Like You're going to continue to improve theoretically, and so just getting that first one out of the way and starting is sometimes the hardest part. But I know people that are now in their mid 40s or early 50s, and they're thinking, oh man, I never made that debut recording. Now I have this huge expectation of like, it has to be huge. And it's like, that's really problematic to actually getting done, in my opinion.
Right. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. And thank you for talking to me about the book. It sounds really interesting. So great stuff. Well, thank you for joining me for the latest episode of Harmonious World. And that was a really interesting conversation with Nick. What you're listening to actually now is his track, Evolution of Perspective, which I did use a part of last time I interviewed him a year ago. But now you've heard the beginning and the end, at the beginning and the end of this podcast. So I hope you enjoy listening to that. Thank you once more for joining me for Harmonious World. Please do like, share, send a link to your friends, share it on social media. Just tell your friends about Harmonious World. It would really help me. I track my statistics all the time and they're really going up, and it's nice to hear that more people are listening in. I have some exciting guests lined up for future episodes of Harmonious World, and I hope you enjoy listening to them. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.